Hey y'all. Welcome back to Chef Live. This week we are continuing our ChefConf Online experience, and we're going to do a little bit of a recap of the sessions that we filmed over the last week, and where you can watch them on June 2nd. We'll talk a little bit about what's coming up next week, and what you can look forward to and what sessions you can attend next week. And then I'm really excited for the main portion of this episode. If you've joined us before, I've talked a lot about Chef 16, excuse me, our recent release for Chef Infra. We've talked about a little bit about some of the features that have gone into it. Nick Rykar joined us and talked a little bit about what he's been working on as sort of the like marketing technical lead for the project. And I talked a little bit about YAML support and shared the work that I was doing on my YAML module for Learn Chef Rally, which if you joined us for that, it was kind of an adventure as usual. I met a lot of obstacles on my way, but the good news on that front is that I have actually shipped the YAML module into Learn Chef Rally, and so it's live right now, which means you can head over to learn.chef.io, and I'll put the link in Twitch directly to the module. But this module walks you through the new YAML support that's been rolled into Chef Infra 16 to make it super easy for people to get started using the chef language and configuring and automating their infrastructure solutions and problems and whatnot. Hey Mandy, how's it going? I am excited to see Kevin Toll is joining us from Inside Chef as well on the Twitch stream, and Jeff Brimmager. How's it going, guys? I'll keep an eye on the chat and like try to call out stuff in there. And so with that being said, if you have any questions over the course of this stream, pop them into chat and we'll be able to answer them. And that brings me to an introduction of our guests today, Lamont Granquist and Tim Smith, both of which are engineers on the Chef Infra 16 team. And they are responsible for all of the awesome stuff that we've been talking about on this stream leading up to today. So I'm very, I'm like super excited to bring them on the show, introduce you to them, and talk a little bit about the contributions that they've made to make things easier for you, as well as how you can kind of pay it back and contribute back into the Chef Infra ecosystem. So with that, I will turn it over and start. I'll open the floor to Lamont and Tim and start kind of the conversation with a question around what your history is in the chef ecosystem, because I know you both have like very long storied pasts working with chefs. So let's start with Lamont, and then Tim will come to you, or if there's a good point for you to jump in and be like, and that's when I joined the scene. I don't know, that makes sense too.
Well, hello, my name is Lamont. I don't know how far back you want to go, because I mean, long before I worked at Chef, I was a system administrator. I started off in doing PC sort of help desk stuff on Novell Networks back in like 1988 or something like that, which should give you some kind of idea of how old I am. So somewhere along the way, I learned Unix system administration at University of Washington. I worked for Amazon for almost 5 years, from 2001 to 2006. So what I did there was I did lots and lots of config management there, and so wound up eventually sort of inheriting the config management framework, and I wrote what it would sort of be the base role for all of Amazon at the time. So, and we
Oh, wow. Like
had,
humble brag.
yeah,
But
so,
like the best humble brag ever.
and
Amazon the bookstore though, right?
what's that?
This is like Amazon the bookstore, not like Amazon the like I own the
Yeah,
world.
well, so EC2 was only just getting created back then, and EC2 is very much done by a different team. That was one of the original founders of Chef was Chris Brown, who built that off in South Africa, actually, as a remote work team. And there were little political things that didn't quite get along with our group and stuff like that. But I got along with him very well though. And but yeah, so I was on the Amazon.com team, and there was a lot of stuff in there though, because that was also we were doing like the back end for Target at the time and stuff like that as well. So it was not just Amazon.com, but there was like there was 30,000 mostly physical servers at the time when I left in like 2006.
Wow.
And then at the time, only a few thousand verts or something like that. But so like, but I upgraded, I upgraded like 15,000 of the old SSH, the non-open SSH daemons to OpenSSH v4.0 back in the day. And so they got a change request to basically do all of that across half of Amazon at the time. Things like that. And so anyway, so that was Amazon. Then I went to Real Networks and wound up at Rhapsody. And eventually wound up a Chef customer because I had known about Chef going on at the time, and I was using CF Engine the whole time, right? Because
Yeah.
it didn't even exist when I got started. But I knew about Chef, and because Chris Brown went there, because Jesse Robbins went there, I'd worked with Jesse Robbins as well. So, and then I didn't know Adam, but I was sort of aware of it the whole time, and then eventually wound up becoming a customer, and then eventually wound up becoming hired there. And I've worked here for like 8 years now or something like that, pretty much entirely on the client.
Jeez.
I think that's
That is,
it.
yeah. That's an impressive history.
Well,
That's awesome. Yeah, like there's so many points in there that I wanted to like that are just really interesting to like dive into. We'll have to have a side conversation about that sometime. If ChefConf comes back in like in person, we should we should grab a coffee or a drink and talk more about your past. That's awesome. Tim, why don't you give us a little history of your experience, your life here at Chef as well?
Yeah, I don't have quite the same history. I'm pretty sure when Lamont was doing NetWare, I was probably in preschool, maybe kindergarten. I don't know. Depends on what part of the year. Not quite as old. That's why I don't get to touch all this Solaris stuff. Yeah, I started with Chef. I was working at a company. We acquired another company up in Seattle, and that Seattle company was actually one of Adam's first HJK projects.
Oh, nice.
I think it had started out as like a puppet shop that Adam had installed Puppet on, and this was like one of the first Chef installations. And the person who was our sysadmin at the time left the company and went to work at Opscode. And I inherited his thing because I was the only person in this company that was a Linux person. They had actually rejected me, hiring me at one point because they said they didn't want any Linux people. They were like a Windows only shop. So I snuck in later. I'm not sure if they remembered me like a few years later when I applied. Didn't mention Linux at all, but came in. They realized that I was like the only Linux person, and they had this new whole like Linux estate. It was all running this chef thing. Nobody had any idea what that was. So I inherited that. Actually, the person I inherited it from is my boss now, which makes it even better. Um,
That's
and
hilarious.
that was like me going into chef, having no idea what any of it was. I went to the first chef community summit. I think I like installed it. That was it. Just quietly sat in the corner and pretended that I knew what I was doing. But that was 2012, I think, or 2011 maybe, something like that. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I've gone through a few different jobs, using chef everywhere. And then eventually working here. So I
Nice.
worked on cookbooks for a while. That was what I originally came on to do, was work on the community cookbook team. Then I started working on Ojai, chef client, cook style, all the kind of ecosystem stuff, bento, test, I don't know, name some things, right? We've all like gotten to touch some stuff.
I feel like that's definitely true for you both. If I named anything, or like, I feel like if I threw a stone, it would hit something that you
I
have
have probably
worked
not
on.
touched as many as Lamont has touched, but I stay out of Burke shelf.
That's awesome. Okay, so now you are both landed solidly on the Chef Infra team. And I wanted to mention also, Tim, you also work with the sous chefs, is that correct?
I do, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that group, and like why you joined it, or why you feel like
Yeah,
it's valuable?
it was something we actually revived. It was like an old idea that had come about. But really, like people come in and they create open source projects, and they probably pretty quickly learn that maintaining open source projects is a lot of work. Uh, you start a job somewhere, you create a cookbook for it, you maintain this cookbook, it becomes a thing that people rely on, and then you get a new job, right? And maybe that job is not a chef job, or maybe that job is not you using Redis or Postgres or whatever you created a cookbook for. And the problem there that we were seeing was that people were creating these cookbooks, large communities of users were gravitating to this work, contributing to it, and then the original author would leave.
Mm,
And it was super problematic for the people that were using the code, but it's also a lot of work for the author, right? It's a lot of work to be counted on to maintain something. People like sometimes get mad at you when you screw things up, believe it or not. So sous chefs is a group where we can all kind of come together and maintain those things. If there's a technology you're not using anymore, or you just want other people, you want to talk to people about what you're creating, you want to get a real process going, you can move your cookbook over to sous chefs, and they can maintain it. And if that's not a thing you want to do anymore, you can kind of leave, which is great. It allows people who might have a project for work around Redis or around MySQL or whatever to come in, do some work on a cookbook, get things working for whatever they need, and then if they leave, that's fine, because another person will show up, and just makes a nice framework for us to have point in time maintainers, I guess, really.
yeah.
But it's turned into a great group of people who have a lot of knowledge of how to do chef cookbooks. They've done some pretty amazing cookbook refactorings. I think over the last year, we've took some super old cookbooks, some stuff that was around definitely when I started chef, and just started over, blew it up and wrote it from scratch, all as like nice, beautiful resource driven cookbooks with testing and stuff. So if people are interested in learning really how to like kind of modernize your infrastructure, it's a great group of people that have a lot of knowledge on how to do that.
Nice. Is there like an application process in order to have sous chefs manage your cookbook, or is it
There's
like,
not. I mean, there is a if you go to souschefs.org, sous-chefs.org, I believe, there's some information there on how you would transfer a cookbook in. But I wouldn't call it an application. It's pretty informal.
okay.
It's a chat room in Slack where people just kind of hang out, and then on Mondays after the chef community meeting, we have a Zoom video chat where again, like super informal, because there's a lot of people there in Europe, so it's a lot of people in Europe at the end of their day hanging around drinking beers.
Which that's a perfect segue for me to talk about an episode of Chef Live coming up at the end of May, May 29th. I'm really excited to have the guests on the show. That episode are going to be some of our sous chefs. So we'll have I am horrible with last names, so Jason Resner, I believe is how it's pronounced, Dan Webb. Sorry, Jason Field, John Resner, and Dan Webb are going to be joining us on May 29th. And more importantly, the reason they're joining us Friday, May 29th at 11 a.m. Pacific time here at Chef Live is because they are getting their own stream here on the Chef Live channel. So on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time, following that community meeting, we're going to host a stream for them to share the work that they're doing within those community cookbooks that Tim was just talking about. So I'm very excited about that. Yes, Sean says that I'm horrible at last name, but awesome at sound effects, which is probably the best description of me throughout the years that I like. That's very spot on, Sean. I used to, in middle school and high school, when we would play like badminton or volleyball in gym, I would like play with sound effects on. So like every time I swung the badminton, whatever racket, yeah, there would be a sound effect going along with it. So anyway, that's an incredibly unrelated tangent. So keep an eye out here on May 29th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, where we will be introducing the sous chefs, talking more about how you can sort of contribute or have your cookbooks maintained and also join the sous chefs, hopefully. So cool. Well, with that, I want to like kind of dive into the Chef 16 updates that you guys are excited about, like the things that you got to work on that you're just like, people will love using this. I'd love to talk about those, or like any I want to like open the floor to you to talk about whatever you want to talk about, but I definitely want to get a little into like the main sort of features: YAML support for recipes, unified mode. I do want to talk about cook style too again, because we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and going into the episode, I did not realize like how literally easy it is to use cook style to like check and upgrade your cookbooks. So I want to talk a little bit about cook style too, but yeah, let me open the floor to you. Tim and Lamont, talk about the cool stuff that you did, and then in the chat, again, if you have any questions for Tim or Lamont, or for all of us, please pop them in there, and I'll keep an eye out and try and get to them. So and actually, with that said, it looks like Jeff does actually have a few questions. So I'm gonna just start with like the first question. I won't read them all, we'll do one at a time. So were the two new resources the last of what needed to be pulled from the Windows cookbook? So it sounds like we added some resources to the Windows cookbook, and Jeff is asking like, are those going to be the last ones that we need?
No, not quite. We're getting super close. Like that, I think that is like a theme of Chef, and that's kind of like, that's been our theme really since Chef 13, somewhere in 13 if you look back. We've just been adding resources, and that the goal there is we want Chef to work out of the box, right? We want it to be simpler to use. As soon as you have to do depth solving, and especially when you get a really complex set of dependencies where you need 30 or 40 or 50 community cookbooks and they depend on other things, you're inevitably going to end up with some conflicts there. Someone is going to say like, I need version 5 or greater of the Windows cookbook, and somebody else is going to say I need 4 or less. And then you're stuck in a place where you can't adopt new code. So we don't want that. We want things to just work. A huge amount of the work, things like the YAML support, unified mode. Lamont's going to talk about a whole bunch of custom resource improvements. Like that is all about just making Chef easier to use. But we added more resources in. We have been really trying to slowly kill off that Windows cookbook. That was a big one. And I think a really big anti-pattern. At one point, we just started putting all of our Windows support into that Windows cookbook, and that became a thing you had to carry around. And if you wanted to get started with Chef, day one, first thing you had to do, install Chef fresh on a Windows node and go to, install a package even long enough ago, and you needed the Windows cookbook. So then you had to figure out, how to get the Windows cookbook on your node and how to upload it to your server. Not the experience we want. So there's some more stuff. There's a few new resources for Windows there. You will see some I wouldn't call them errors, but warnings that they conflict with cookbook resources. And what that's saying is that you have it defined in the cookbook and we're not going to use it there. I have a little PR I need to make to basically turn those off so they won't even try to load when you're on that version of Chef. But that's a harmless warning. You can ignore that. That's basically saying that we're just about done. And I would say for 99.99% of users, they could just remove the Windows cookbook entirely. They don't need that. The only one that I think is left is there is a HTTP like winner and binding resource or something to that effect that is a pretty obscure thing that a few people in Windows use. And I think that's the last one left. We didn't move there's a Windows zip file resource. We didn't move that, we just replaced it. But everything else for the most part, we kind of cracked it open, heavily refactored it, cleaned it up, made it work on, all across different versions of Windows, and then shipped it directly into the client. So.
And that goes along with a like recurring theme, not just on the stream here, but in Chef internally in general, is like paying off technical debt. And going back and saying, what are those anti-patterns that we were like, hey, in this moment, this is what works and this is what we need to go with so we can move forward. But like 6 years later, it maybe isn't the right pattern anymore. That's been a huge part of not just the Chef Infra team's work, but like I said, kind of everybody internally at Chef is, let's pay off that technical debt and like get to a place where the cool like new features that we get to like work on and that our customers are really excited about, they will work a lot better and a lot easier because of all the work we're doing to pay off this debt. So Jeff says, sounds like I need to make some new PRs then for HTTP request.
If somebody wants to move that, they can go do that for me. I would love that.
Yes, that is the beauty of having this code open source. You can contribute.
There's been a huge, if you look at the contributions in Chef 16, we got a whole bunch of really cool stuff. A whole bunch of things went into Workstation just recently, but actually in the Chef client, we got a bunch of really cool work like refactorings to Windows Firewall, and some nice stuff across a bunch of the Windows resources where people who were using those in a lot more advanced ways went and just like tore them apart and refactored it, which is always awesome to see. Somebody who understands like all the craziness of like Windows Firewall groups. And I'm like, sure,
it's
that's right.
I do always like it. It's always awesome to find that one person who is like so in love with that one thing that nobody else is in love with. It's like so satisfying when you find that match. Okay, well, I want to see some stuff. So I think Lamont, you had some code you wanted to share with us and kind of walk through. Am I correct in that?
You are correct. I've also got Uh,
Ooh, yes.
so is that actually showing up on Twitch? Oh, there we go. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right, and let's rearrange my screen a little bit. Okay, so this is, I made this list this morning of stuff that I did that went into Chef 16, or in some cases went into Chef 15 as well, but is sort of landing in Chef 16 as a major thing. So one of the biggest things is unified mode, which is, it's a switch in resources so that you can turn off the two-pass parser, the compile converge modes within the resource. So there is just a single pass. So you get to stop. You can stop worrying about that, the two passes and the construction, the parsing the Ruby code and then constructing the resource collection and all the problems that causes. And I've got some examples of that. I think I'm going to go through this list first, though, and then come back and start doing examples.
Okay, cool.
Another thing is that we've been working on getting Chef Sugar into core. We've got a gem now, which is called Chef Utils, which is in the Chef repository in the same Git repository as the client code. And we've extracted lots of the helpers to that. Let's see. Well, the easiest way to do that actually is really just to kind of show the README. And so yeah, that's the README. So there's all these helpers, and they're pretty close to what was in Chef Sugar. There's a few changes where we cleaned up some very strange APIs that Chef Sugar had, so there may be technically breaking changes. But we tried to keep it so that code that worked on Chef Sugar will work for all of the major stuff on Chef Utils. And this is now just baked directly into Chef Client, so you don't have to worry about the fact that it is a different gem. It's a different gem so that we can reuse it other places, but for cookbook authors, it's all just baked in.
Nice.
And you can even you can go, it's all baked into the DSL. You can also just pretty simply do bake it into your library code as well. So I'm not going to show that. I'll just show that README. Resource partials are a way of doing extracting multiple properties that are shared across different resources. And it's not inheritance, but it's just a way of reducing the amount of typing that you need to do. And I actually do have I've got a code example of that.
Nice.
Required properties is that now all of your required properties will really be required when you try and run the resource. Before, required properties were only being required when they were actually used inside of the action, which is surprised everybody, right?
Yeah.
So it does mean, though, that if you have a resource which if you have a resource which has multiple actions, one is, say, an install action, one is a delete action, and the delete action doesn't need a whole bunch of properties. You now need to specifically go in and say, my required properties are only required for the install property. So instead of required just taking true or false, it now takes an array of symbols.
Ooh, okay.
So the symbols are the actions. So you just say it's required for the install action. And that has nice effects on the docs as well, right? Because whatever that property was, it wasn't required to delete it, but it was showing up as required in the documentation. And so now we can actually have better documentation, and that's stuff that makes Tim happy.
Dan says in the chat, Dan says that this is the best thing in Chef Infra 16.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I'm a little worried because it actually is a little bit of a breaking change, but it does, I think, make things a lot clearer and better. Like this has actually broken a couple of our internal resources. We've had to go clean up our own stuff where required stuff was not really required.
Technical debt. Woohoo!
Yes, it is technical debt. So then this notify group, this is for people have been abusing like the log resource to do groups of chain notifications. And the problem with that is that also people really hate the fact that the log resource goes and updates, then it updates and it's in that updated count. The log resource fires as a resource, and now you have one resource updated, and you will never get 0 resource updated. So there's been this long-standing bug. I want it to be 0, but like the log resource messes that up. So the log resource no longer notifies. That means though that people that had been using the log resource to hang notifications off of it, which is something that's happened in the past, though that code will now be broken. I believe Tim can probably talk about chef style finding that for you. But there's the notify group resource basically does nothing, but fires and allows you to chain notifications off of it. So it's the way to go do that.
Nice.
Eager load libraries is something that most people won't care about, but it turns off the automatic library loading. So you can set it to false, and it will not parse any of your libraries to begin with, but it will now put all of your library directory in the Ruby include path, and then you can require stuff. So you can also pass it a like hook.rb, and then it will load your hook.rb, and then you can go through and require things in the order that you want. And what that does is that avoids people having to create library files named like 00 underscore or ZZ underscore, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it also means that if you have a gem, because it includes it, it pushes it into the include path, you can take a gem, you can take its lib directory entirely, jam it into your cookbook, and then you can vendor a gem using that. It's not the greatest way to do that, but it makes it a lot easier, and that's something that like a few people in the world need. So that's eager load libraries. Reporting accuracy got better. So there's this, the name property becomes the default identity property and has desired state false. Nobody probably cares about this, but it's more correct now. And then there's this after resource, which is wired up automatically to load current value. This is another thing that most people don't even know this is going on, but now there is an after resource, which is very much like the current resource and is used for reporting, where reporting was previously using what we call the new resource as the after resource. But the new resource is that thing that you build where you give the desired state. And then we were using that as the after state. Instead, we actually go now, and the after resource is meant to be loaded just like the current value off of the state on the system. And then you get that the current value was loaded first, the after resource was loaded last, and then you can just kind of diff those, and you get all the differences that were actually made.
Oh, nice.
If people use load current value, that automatically populates the current resource and the after resource based on the code there, because it's the same problem. So it will just happen for free and nobody will know what's going on, and then reporting will be correct. So you get that for free. You don't really have to do anything. That does break some people who thought load current value was an initializer and did a whole bunch of stuff in there, because now it will be getting called twice. But that was never what it was for. But I have seen resources in the wild that have been doing stuff like that.
I think that's like the most common phrase uttered at Chef, that's not what it was for, but I've seen people use it that way. Like, we didn't intend for that to be used that way.
Right.
Brian. And Jeff says load current value has been awesome. So sounds like he's also using it out in the wild at customers.
And then there's this last thing I had is there's this magical canonical DSL. This is where the class name, when you inherit from Chef Resource, the class name is automatically converted to snake case and wired up to the DSL for you, which dates back to the way things were in Chef 0.1 probably, whenever resources were created. So it no longer does that. That caused all kinds of strange bugs that pretty much when somebody hit that, mostly what people were doing is they were trying to use inherit from a sort of abstract base class that was inheriting from Chef Resource, which then wired up that abstract base class, which wasn't a resource really, to the DSL, and then strange things happened. And then I was the only person in the world that could solve that problem. So mostly like it's just gone now. So the problem is though is that there's a few resources out there in the wild which depended on this, and those resources need to either declare their resource name or declare a provide statement. So they must declare, you know, my resource name is this resource or provides this resource. But that's pretty uncommon. And if you're writing custom resources in the resources directory, you don't have to worry about it at all because you're not naming your own classes. So this has not been a problem for anybody writing proper custom resources.
When would you encounter these? Like when would a user have encountered that issue?
Well, this is the way everything was done. I mean, this is the way that well, it's library providers, right? So it's like if you've looked at the MySQL cookbook, but don't, right? Particularly older versions of the MySQL cookbook, where everything is in the libraries directory, so all your resources and providers are there, and so all the classes get names. And particularly in that one, that's one of the cases where it was trying to, like the MySQL client, whatever resource would inherit from the MySQL client base resource, and that was wiring up the MySQL client thing, which colliding with the MySQL client that was being wired up by the individual, by the subclasses, and it was terrible. So that whole, like, in that abstract base class thing is really, that's why we have these resource partials that I'll show later.
Okay.
Which is sort of a more correct way of, or at least a safer way of going about doing that.
Cool. Well, maybe that's a good segue into a resource partial demo or showing us that.
Let's see. So what do I have?
The word to the dirty word is HWRPs.
Yeah, HWRPs, lightweight, heavyweight resources, where like there was a lot of crazy stuff circa 2013, 2012 or so that we were actually telling people was the way to do it. It was really not the way to do it.
Seemed really cool until we realized it was actually really hard. We've spent years making it.
So this is working.
I don't have to write those anymore.
So
while you're loading that up, Lamont, DeCheese11 in the chat asked if you have any plans of publishing an updated customizing Chef O'Reilly book. And I think the current answer is like, we don't have any current plans of doing that. And I think it was something that like O'Reilly has to reach out to us to do or something. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but that is a great question that I can ask kind of internally, unless Tim or Lamont, either one of you knows and is like working on an update to that book in your
everyone should just John Cowie directly and ask him why he hasn't updated his book.
I will ping him to cheese.
Yeah, I think that, that wasn't a chef book.
Yeah.
Like a lot of those other books, they were written by people that were in the community. Now John does work for us now, but yeah, he would have to update that book. O'Reilly probably would have to ask us or ask him to update that book as well.
And then Dan says he's pretty sure the sous chefs have basically rewritten those books for everybody already anyway. Oh, it's so true. Jeff ran into the canonical thing writing a helper library the other day. Is that expected? Once he figured out what was happening, it was easy to fix. So is it expected to run into the helper library canonical thing that we were just talking about before I asked you to get into this demo? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah, it trips people up all the time. Well, not all the time. I mean, it's a very advanced thing to do because you have to be doing a library, you have to be inheriting from Chef Resource, and then all of a sudden it does, like, it wires it up magically to the DSL when you don't expect it. And then particularly in Chef spec, everything goes really wonky. And yeah, so it is entirely expected because that was the way that things were. There didn't used to be a resource name. There didn't used to be provide statements. There wasn't like you would get wired up to the class name converted to state case, and that was the way that everything happened. But going back long before Chef 12, that was, and Chef 11, that was dates back a long time ago. And so the point is that now that's gone, so now it doesn't happen. So nobody will stumble across that anymore post Chef 16.
Woohoo!
And you just need to, every resource needs to have a provides in it someplace. So you need this thing, right?
Yeah. Nice. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a example of using resource partials. So this is the partial that I have in this cookbook. The trick here is that it starts with an underscore. So everything in the resources directory which starts with an underscore is now not parsed. So I checked every single cookbook on the supermarket, and there was nobody using an underscore in front of a resource. So I don't think I broke anybody by that, but that is a potentially breaking change if anybody did that. But now these are partials, so they're not parsed as resources. So what happens is they're just class evaled into the resource that you are writing by this use statement. So by doing here, we have this, we have thing 1 and we have thing 2 as resources, right? And so they provide thing 1 and thing 2. And they want to share their properties because they have basically the same interface. And so you have this code sharing problem. And so you just go use my properties. And there's a little bit of sugar around, you say my properties and you get the underscore and you get the .rb. You can also include the underscore and the .rb up here, and it's kind of reasonably smart about that.
That's nice. At least like, even if we expect people to know that they're related, if they don't and they include that, they'll still be fine.
Yeah. And so this is how you can sort of dry up your properties in your interface. You can also put anything in here. So you can put your action class helpers in here. You can do include and extend, and you could even throw shared actions in here because it's really just a way to dry up typing. So anything that you can write in a resource, you can write in a partial. There is no inheritance because it is just a class eval. So you can't call like this. This is getting a little bit weird because if you tried to do the action class and redefine this helper and call super or something like that, like there's no inheritance here or anything like that. This is just typing and monkey patching. So yeah, and so like I've done this, and so we have a foo and a bar property on thing 1 and thing 2, and I have the world's simplest recipe, which calls thing one foo and bar, and it runs. And so you get thing one and thing two, and the foo and the bar are shared. Thing I guess to show, I set it up so I could show this, right? Let's see. So this is why you have to do it. So here we are trying to create, so if you're writing a proper custom resource so you're in a resources directory, you're trying to write thing one here. So the thing is that you don't have this, right? So you don't have class thing one inherits from chef resource or anything like that. So you can't use inheritance. One thing you could do is you could go include my properties, right? Something like that instead. So the problem with that though is if you tried to do it, so now you won't get anywhere. So here we've created our library of our shared properties, and we haven't even tried to use it yet. But what's going to happen is this will blow up on parsing. So this blows up parsing this file with undefined method property for my properties, because here you can't do this. Since you can't do that, it doesn't know anything about what these properties are.
Yeah.
So you're never getting anywhere with that. We could go down the route of trying to extract bits out of Chef Resource and include them, so you can include properties in a module and do stuff like that, but that would be a whole lot of work. So the solution is just resource partials.
And this is a super, super helpful thing for a lot of people that run into this. Like internally, we just realized we could do some awesome refactoring on things like the cron resources. They have a page and a half of input validations that they do, like make sure that you're providing like the correct date ranges, and it's all this crazy stuff. And we had to do all these terrible things to make those properties the same between the cron and the cron D resource. It ends up being a huge amount of duplicate code. You have to keep it in sync manually. And now it's like, well, I just take all the properties and I put them in a partial, and I take all the validation and I put it in a partial, and I just use it on both. And of course, now they get the same, weekday and month, and all those fields are just the same, and they validate exactly the same. Another place I really want to use this is the Docker cookbook. There's a huge number of properties there that are just about like setting up Docker connections. Like, how do I auth to Docker? And it's the same kind of stuff. You have to do all this like, input validation and coercion on some of the data, because it's like a pretty complex resource. And the way to do it before was to write the HWRPs, and it was terrible. So this lets you do it like the right way, the native way, and a nice repeatable way in our DSL.
Nice. Dan says those resources are very clean. Good job, guys. And Jeff says this has held him up on some habitat cookbooks, so that might clear up some like barriers there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I just showed we're using it internally. This is the Chef 16 code. This is the SCM base class of, so the source code module or whatever base class of the Git and Subversion resources. Both use this.
Nice. So we're eating our own dog food, as they say.
Correct. Yeah. So this has unified mode turned on too, which is a segue to unified mode, right?
Woo! Perfect segue.
Okay. So let's see. What do I want to do? What do I want to do? I want to, let's go into unified mode. Okay, so here is a resource. So this is a badly written resource, besides being kind of useless. So we have a file resource here.
Yes.
We're trying to read the file that we write. So we use a resource to create the file. Then in pure Ruby, we try to read it. And this fails.
Oh no.
So fails, no such file or directory, you can't read that, you're in line 10 in read. So this is the problem where, whoops, that's not what I want. This is the problem where this is compile converge mode. So all you're doing here when you go through the first time is you're parsing this and you're creating a file resource in the resource collection. It hasn't run yet. Then you try and read it and it hasn't executed. The file resource doesn't run until you get down here, right? And start the converge phase. So unified mode, whoops. Unified mode means that everything executes in order. So now it gets created and then we go read it, right?
Nice.
So that is probably the simplest demo possible, right?
Yeah.
I think Lamont just deleted a chapter of John Cowie's book with that, like explaining what compile and converge mode is. He's like, oh yeah, you don't even know that because we just fixed it.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. So then that's the simplest thing you can do. So then for like a more useful example, oops, so here's a more useful example, right? Which is I've got a resource. I want to download this JSON file. Then I want to actually parse it. And then I want to render some content into a file or resource or a template or whatever. Mm-hmm. So this is how to do it correctly currently in Chef, we call it 14. Unified mode's actually in Chef 15 as well. It's been around for about 8 months or something like that now.
Oh, nice. We just snuck it under the cover.
Yeah, it was sort of soft launched in Chef 15 because I had no idea if it was going to actually be a sane thing to do or not, right? And so it's proven. I've actually sent it out. I've solved problems at customer sites with it.
Nice.
So most of the resources internally have been converted. So now it's just the splashy launch with Chef 16. But it also means that you can use it going back to Chef 15.5 or something like that. And the unified mode, the command is actually supported in Chef 14, so it doesn't fail, but it doesn't do anything useful either. So you can go like unified mode false and it won't cause Chef 14 to blow up. So this is
really
horrible.
Snuck it in under the cover of darkness.
Yeah. So this is horrible because we're having to lazy this parsing here. Because we're creating this inside of this block, we also need to know about lexical scoping here. And then we have to lazy this down here. And the whole thing's kind of terrible. So did I actually show this?
Basically, in order to like write a JSON file and then convert it and then write more into it, you have to add a bunch of code that's like, wait until this JSON file is rendered in the first place, then wait until it's actually like changed into this other format. And now you can kind of ignore those extra lines of code that you might not know about.
You also, need a CS degree.
Also this. You need to know the words lexical scoping.
Lexical scoping probably isn't in the average sysadmin's vocab.
Right. And so then I need to run it so I can show you that like it actually works. This is correct sort of non-unified mode code. So we do that. And then the first thing we do is Ruby blocks become just pointless. So all Ruby blocks just really go away. And then the next thing is just lazy goes away. Doesn't exist anymore, pretty much. And so then we do that. Oh, I probably should have. It doesn't actually do anything because it's important. So then we run it, and it actually does stuff. So those are equivalent, right? But that is way simpler. That's what you want, right? So now you can just write that.
That's
The
awesome.
beautiful thing there, Lamont, too, is that is idempotent. And you were talking before about people who want that magical zero. That Ruby block would have run every time. So like you would have never gotten a zero. Even with that old code working, it would not have worked.
And that's right, because and your notifications would always fire because that Ruby block would always fire. So yeah, everybody's been writing bad chef code for the past 10 years. Nobody knows how to write chef code correctly.
That could be true as well.
Only Lamont can write proper
Oh,
chef
because I didn't catch that when I was thinking about this.
Yeah. Oh, and Dan says, do we still have need for those 2 stages these days anyway?
Yeah, well, we certainly don't. Like, nobody cares about the 2 stages inside of a custom resource. It's really super pointless, right? So what people care about is recipe mode. So there is no unified mode for recipe mode. So I tried to write that. It's going to be a little bit hard to write it because of ugly code in Chef Client.
I don't think I'm familiar with rescue mode. Can you talk about what
recipe mode in as opposed to resources?
I was like, rescue mode, is that like if you've done too many git commands incorrectly, you can just chef rescue me?
I think like this is going to be awesome for people's brains too, because you got to think about what happens right now when Chef runs and it goes into a bunch of custom resources. Like you've got just like all these little compile converge phases going on that are just like gonna wreck troubleshooting.
Yeah, and I mean, I could show like the Mac user resource that we did internally was terrible in Chef 15. So we wound up having to convert that pretty much entirely to use a whole lot of forcing things to compile mode, which was just, yeah, it's just super terrible. Because yeah, this is probably really compelling video when I'm sitting here trying to surf and where am I? Mac, I'm not in package. Problem is I'm trying to talk and surf at the same time, and one of them's gonna suffer.
Let's
okay, I've got it.
Oh yeah, and Dan says it's probably faster too. Do you know if this is a question that like when I worked with customers a lot, I got this question a lot about how many resources does Chef Client use up when it runs? And like really that answer is hard to answer if you don't know exactly.
I'm sure that way is faster because I mean you're not creating that whole Ruby block in the Chef resource collection. You're not dealing with notifications firing. You're not logging that. There's a whole bunch of things that just got skipped there that we have to like initialize in that compile phase that just aren't there anymore.
Yeah. So this is the Chef 15 version of the user provider for Mac.
Do you think you could increase the text on there just a teeny bit? Oh yeah, that's perfect. Okay.
So this is sort of horrible stuff going on here. So the thing you need to know here is that, well, we're using declare resource, but this is just a group resource we're creating. Down here, we're doing a converge by to do run DSCL, which is just a shell out. So this is all not a resource. This is pure Ruby. We want this, though, to come after this. So all of the resources in here have this action nothing and force to compile time to make it so that this will run in the correct order. So can I just do that and get back to master? And I have no idea where I was. But okay, that's where we were, yeah. So here we are. This is, you didn't see the unified mode true at the top, or actually it's in the resource, so you wouldn't see it anyway. But this is Chef 16. And so now that forcing the compile time and the action nothing and all that just goes away, and you can just write it in order. And it made this so much easier.
Yeah, I won't pretend that I like can look at that and know exactly what's going on just by looking at it, but I can look at this versus what you just showed us, and like it already looks cleaner and more concise.
I mean, it's like, it's pretty night and day when you just want to sprinkle some Ruby somewhere, especially when you find people who like want to write a chef recipe where in the middle they want to do like a puts. And they're
Oh
like,
yes.
but I just want to like put something so I can see it in the log. And you're like, that's not going to work though. That doesn't work. You can't just put. So like all those troubleshooting techniques that you might use if you've ever written scripts and you're like, where am I? Just say where I am. That stuff just works. I know like I wrote like probably the first actual resource I wrote in Chef was like the app preference resource, and it needed a bunch of Ruby sprinkled in. And I did not understand how bad this could get. And it was just like me scratching my head, not understanding why it's like, but I wrote this right here, but it shows up down here, like, and like Tom May and Lamont were like, yeah, like it's compile converge. And I was like, ah, like, and we had to do some terrible things, pretty much the same thing Lamont showed, like putting stuff into Ruby blocks, everything's in compile, or forced to compile mode. It became like 10x more complex to write this thing. And I'm like, man, if I had written that now, it would just be like start to finish, like just the things you're trying to do. Like, well, first I want to create this file, and then I want to kind of read it with Ruby, because of course it's there, right? I can do that. And it's like, well, no, you couldn't before. So yeah, this is an awesome feature for anybody who writes custom resources. And eventually, you know, they'll become the default, and those young kids won't know the pain.
Yes. So the one thing I wanted to say though, which is recipe mode. So we can't do it yet for recipe mode, and the compile converge mode is used in recipe mode specifically for hacking around badly written cookbooks where you need to go and edit resource something, right? So you want to hack up the resource collection. So it gets used for that a lot. We will probably have to do something where we introduce a way of pre-declaring that we want to hack up a resource when we see it first, and then include recipe, the horrible cookbook, and then it will go and it will see, it will hit that resource, look it up in a table of stuff and go, oh, I need to replace this, right? Instead of doing it after the fact, where the resource collection is built, and then you're going through there and doing edit resource and find resource and stuff like that. Properly written accumulators will still continue to work because they should be accumulating a delayed resource. So that delayed resource notification of the outer root resource recipe context will still be there. Those should still work. So the IP tables accumulator, IP tables cookbook accumulator should still work. So even after unified mode for recipes though is not written yet. So, but I think we do, like based on this, I think we do need to get there at some point. In the future, unified mode is I wanted to get unified mode for all of the internal core chef resources by 16.0, but it's going to be 16.1 or 16.2. But 17.0 unified mode probably becomes the default way of writing resources. Probably in something like 18.0, the switch gets flipped, the switch that is not yet built to do unified mode for recipe mode.
Nice. So in the next year, probably we should look for recipe mode to have unified mode as well.
Yeah, that's basically just as soon as I can get my head out of 16.0 regressions and stuff.
And Dan says they're using the edit resource a lot in things like HA proxy and stuff, but also using that delayed resource to kind of get around it. So
that's the correct way of doing an accumulator. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Well, I think you had a couple more things you wanted to demo from that list.
Nope, I'm done.
Oh, done.
Unless somebody wants me to demo it and wants me just to watch me typing. That's all I had prepared.
Nice. Tim, do you have anything you want to share?
And I do. I have some stuff I would love to show off.
Ooh, Whew, yay. Okay, I was gonna say don't feel like put on the spot or anything, but never mind.
No, I
You're
didn't
on the
prepare it all. I got nothing.
spot.
Yeah, I got a few things. We can talk.
Cool.
Desktop 2, here we go.
Ooh,
All right,
yes.
so I've got this AWS instance, and this is kind of highlights something pretty cool that we put together in Chef 16. And it's been kind of a long march, like a lot of other things. Like they don't magically happen on marketing cadences, despite what the marketing teams want.
What?
We've been working for a really long time internally to totally ground up revamp how we build Chef. We used to be like a really old Jenkins setup. It was very static. We have built our Expediter tool that we use internally for releasing everything, and everything's on BuildKite. And some of the cool things that has given us is really the ability to just massively scale out our platforms that we support and to add more. Thanks, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, yes. I have been hoping that someone famous would join the stream ever since Gene Kim.
Knew that was gonna happen. I'm sure he's gonna come back, but so one of the things that really allowed us to do was just be a lot faster with adding platforms. If anybody has previously complained when we didn't hit a release date for Ubuntu, like it was really hard for us to add new platforms. So this is a box, and we can look at what it is with LS CPU, I think. Yeah. So this is an ARM box. They're pretty cool in Amazon. They're a little cheaper for people who like that. If you just need like simple web servers, like they're the way to go. And this is also, I can type. This is an Ubuntu 2004 box. So we have an Ubuntu 2004 ARM box. Neither of these things were supported in Chef 15, but they are now. So I can just go and get a package, right? And I get an arm64.deb here. And it is for Ubuntu, and it works. And I can just run like Ohio, which I probably need to like sudo Ohio this. I can run Ohio, and it'll just like magically detect it, right? In some time. Yeah, so like all the little things come back that I'm on an ARM box, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I still have all my like EC2 metadata, so somewhere down here. Yeah, so I still have all the metadata coming back from Amazon that I'm on this A1 XL box, which is pretty cool. This is just one of the new platforms we added. So we have ARM support basically across the board in our Linux setup. We also have Amazon 2 as an actual certified platform now. It worked before. I mean, if anybody is using Amazon, they probably kind of know where Amazon's coming from. If you had Amazon 2, that's really just RHEL 7. And if you had Amazon 2000, whatever, that was kind of like a weird 6/7 mix thing. So you could install those packages before. They worked fine. We're just actually certifying them. They go through our test pipelines. They go through our build pipelines. Which is always nice. Like people like packages that work. That was that part of it. I did have we introduced a bunch of new resources and kind of going into the simplicity of Chef, right? We wanted to work out of the box. We want you to just be able to get things done. So we've looked at all the things you need to do kind of at the OS level down. Like if it is from kind of, you know, operating system authentication, security, that kind of stuff, down to the hardware level, like Chef should be able to do that out of the box. There's obviously some places where we probably still don't have that, but a lot more of them get added with every release. So one of the big ones that you would need for anybody, you know, pushing Chef out instantly is going to be managing Chef Client, getting Chef Client actually running on a cadence. Because I just installed it, right? Like, what do I do now? Well, the answer shouldn't be go get the Chef Client cookbook. We want that to just work. So first part of that is adding some new resources built in for actually managing Chef to run on a cadence. So this is one of them. It's the Chef Client System D Timer.
Cool.
We also have Chef Client cron and Chef Client scheduled tasks. So that gives you basically every version of Linux. It also gives you Windows. We're going to do a LaunchD one, but it needs a little more work because LaunchD is maybe not the best init system out there. There's some issues. You can't just restart a thing on LaunchD. I think this is the way to go. I know a lot of people have historically really wanted to run Chef as a service. There's a lot of downsides to that. You have that long-running process, particularly for people who complain about resource utilization. You have a process. Like it might use an incredibly small amount of memory, but you have the chef client somewhere on your system that's running. It also makes things a lot more difficult for things like chef client upgrades. If you have failures that happen, like how do I make sure the client comes back up? How do I make sure that the upgrade happens? If you put it on a timer or a cron job, you know it's running on that cadence. You can also do a bunch of really cool things, like you can have more than one timer. These are just resources now in Chef. So if you wanted to say like, hey, I run like every 30 minutes, and every once in a while I run this terrible run list, a separate run list that I need to do for some weird thing, like backup run list or something. You can run that on a totally different schedule.
Well, that's cool.
So I could just use Chef Apply because I don't actually have this checked into anything, but that really just lets you run a single recipe, and that's a really fun way to test stuff out. So I can run this. It should just apply in a second.
Oh, Will, Tim is typing chef-apply. Oh, okay.
Oh, is it because it's at the bottom?
Yeah.
That is a great.
Yeah, is there a chance?
Is that better?
Yeah. I think
yeah, so. The banner cut me off, man. I should look over and see. I'll put it down a little bit further. There we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, so
awesome.
that was just chef-apply. And what you can see here is that we set up an actual service. So timers in System D are like a service that is a one-shot type service, and then a timer unit that goes along. The timer unit actually kicks off the one-shot service. So this service is set up to just run chef client, point at the client.rb. It accepts a bunch of different exit codes. These are for like restarts and all that kind of stuff. And then this is where we actually define the one that's running. It's going to run every 30 minutes out of the box. You saw I didn't provide any details there. There's obviously properties for all that stuff. We could set the on boot time, and that's the time after the system boots that it'll start running this. If I just restarted that timer again, it would wait another minute. That's just its on boot time. It'll run every 30 minutes, and it's going to do a randomization of 5 minutes. If you auto scale like 1,000 nodes, they don't all run at once, right?
Yeah, is that the equivalent of splay in the chef client cookbook?
Yeah, and this way we don't have to do the splay
yeah.
in the chef client. We're letting the init system do the splay, which is, again, like, we want to be responsible for less. We want to trust you. We want to trust your operating system to just do the right thing.
Yeah, and does that allow the init system to say like, hey, like to pay attention to not just chef client? Hey, I have all these different resources and I should splay them.
It doesn't, I don't think it takes into account the other ones, but I'm trying to remember what the command, there's a system D or system cuddle timer. It's like system D, cuddle timers. I don't know. There's a list in there. It's system D, it's huge. There's like a way you can see all your timers, which is actually pretty cool. And it'll tell you like, here's when I'm going to run.
Ooh, yeah.
Here's the display that I've already determined that I'm going to apply. So nice. You can like literally watch a countdown to the time it's going to run, which is pretty cool. I just can't for the life of me remember what it is.
That's I can never remember those commands off the spot.
Yeah. Why didn't you write this down?
Yeah.
Preparation here. This is the same thing in YAML because we can chef apply in YAML. So we'll just show that. It's bigger. I'm just gonna throw it out there. That is more work than writing it in Ruby.
Oh yeah, Will to the rescue says system cuddle
list timers. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so we can see now that this thing was nicely idempotent, and it's gonna enable it and start it and create it and all that stuff. And there's all the options, right? So I can do some more advanced stuff. The other cool thing you get with some of these init systems is the ability to state if you want something to run when you're on battery power. That's a cool feature in System D. You can do it in scheduled tasks as well. So we've exposed that. So if you want to say like, hey, I have laptop fleets and I don't want Chef to run when they're on battery because like obviously it's something that consumes power,
Yeah.
you can skip that, which is always nice.
I-
Not as big a deal for server folks, but I don't know, maybe it knows better.
No, yeah, I think we have a lot of people interested. First of all, we have a lot of users who are like, hey, can we do desktop fleet management in addition to our infrastructure, like our data center operations? So this is like, you have slipped so many like giant things in as like, oh yeah, this is like this little tiny feature that we just implemented. But that's really huge. Like, yeah, for a lot of our users, I think that's going to
I don't
be
know, System D.
yeah, and it
Too
prepares.
old.
Well, it prepares the
Was it X?
way for a project that another internal chef engineer is working on right now, which I don't think I can talk about yet, but that if you're paying attention on June 2nd, which is ChefConf Online, if you have not been paying attention, we're going to announce a new a product that we are offering, or a solution really for desktop management and fleet management like that. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It's going to be pretty awesome. And we will hopefully have at least someone from the team that is working on that project to join the stream and talk a little bit about it once it's actually announced and released to the public. So yes. And that is, I'll pause, sorry, Tim, just to say that's a really good segue to remind you that if you haven't registered yet for ChefConf Online this year, you should head to chefconf.io and register now. And there are a couple ways you can kind of interact with ChefConf this year. You can attend the actual recordings for our sessions in Zoom the whole month of May leading up to ChefConf, or you can attend our breakout sessions where we'll have those Zoom recordings aired, and then we'll be able to have sort of question and answer discussions around that. So head to chefconf.io and register today for all the things, but especially for the trivia night that will be hosted here on the Chef live stream. Anyway, back to you, Tim.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just getting schooled on my lack of knowledge of System D over here. Like, what do you mean you can't just like tail a log anymore? Yeah, the other cool thing probably to say there when you use those, when you use that setup with the System D timer is everything's just going to the system journal, right? So you're getting all the utilities you can do there. You can dive in, and if you're doing forwarding to whatever, right, to Splunk or to the syslog server or something like that, out of that centralized login on your system, that just happens.
Nice.
So that's pretty cool. It makes diving into the logs a lot easier.
Yeah.
Another little tidbit probably on logging to mention is we made some cool changes to how logging happens on the command line. So you will see all the logs. If you have a sysadmin that dives onto a system and runs Chef Client, and they specified the logs, previously the logs would just go to the system. You'll actually see the logs now going out to where the log file is. So that was probably what you intended, but I know I definitely had some troubleshooting sessions before where I was looking at like a log and I'm like, wait, there's a gap here. It's like, oh yeah, somebody ran it by hand. So that's a cool one, just a little tidbit. It was actually a side effect of a bug fix, but I was like, that's a feature. These are some of the resources we added.
That was a deliberate feature.
That was a great feature.
I made sure that it actually worked that way because that's probably what people mean.
That's definitely what people want. So we added some more resources. This is bringing in stuff from some great cookbooks we had. So we have alternatives now. Added all the Chef Client ones. If you'd used the Chef Client cookbook before, the Chef Client scheduled task was actually part of that cookbook for a while. It got a few changes to it, but for the most part, it shipped as is, other than internal code refactoring. And then we have a plist resource. This was a pretty cool one. This came from the macOS cookbook, and user U limits, which are really super handy for anybody who has wonderful file count limits that they run into. And then 2 new Windows ones that are letting you set local security policies and then set more advanced user privileges. So these are pretty cool. One little thing that Lamont didn't mention that we got on resources is you can just set compile time now on all your resources, which is cool. Before, it was only like 5 of the built-ins that let you do that. That just comes for free now, which is always good.
That was part of the chef sugar deprecation.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's pretty cool just being able to force them all. Yeah, so I will close that out. I wanted to talk a little bit about cook style and what that's going to give you. So I have some examples here of cook
Yay.
style for folks that might not be as familiar with that. I picked a few random cookbooks on the internet. I don't want anybody who wrote them to be offended because I just found like old cookbooks. So some of them have been written by people. I'm pretty sure I know who wrote this one. This shows off some cool features. I'm using VS Code here. If you're not using VS Code, you should probably use VS Code.
Rob Kit says they're all Timbermans.
They're not all Timbermans, not all of them. They're the cool thing you get here, you start to see some things built in with cook style. So there is a chef extension for VS Code, which is why I say that everybody should just use VS Code. So if you install an extension, you can just install this chef extension here. And that gives you a bunch of cool features. One of them is the ability to get highlights on what's happening in your cookbook with cook style. So cook style is just going to run. Unfortunately, it's going to run against the whole thing. So if you open up like your entire repository, it's going to try to run cook style against the whole thing. But it's going to run against your cookbook, and you're going to see different colors depending on what it is. So in this case, it's telling you there's a deprecation here. I went and found this while Lamont was talking to show off specifically somebody who's doing some notification chaining or aggregation or whatever you want to call it. So where people would do this a lot is if they had a thing they did somewhere in a resource that required a restart. So they were like, hey, I have this recipe that sets up some service, and somewhere at the end of it, like I'm going to need to restart that service, but I don't want to take the service down. And there's like 6 things that might update that service, and I certainly don't want to restart it 6 times because Chef will gladly do that for you. So what they would do is they would have everybody notify to the log resource to log, I'm going to restart the service. And then at the end, the log resource would do the notification once. So no matter how many times the log resource got that call from all these other things, you know, running a script or deleting a file or whatever, it would all just aggregate it into a single notification. But this isn't going to work, right? Like this whole thing is not going to work because that log resource never updates. So everybody would still be able to notify to the log resource. It just wouldn't do anything. It would just kind of, and this will just tell you that you need to do that. It gives you nice little hovers that tell you like what the full message is. And the hovers you can't see here are different colors based on the severity. So in this case, we get this little yellowy orange one. It highlights the file and gives you a count, which is pretty cool. So
That's
there's
awesome.
4 problems in this file. I will pop up a different one that's a little more exciting to look at that kind of digs a little bit deeper into some of the issues you might see. So this is like a much older cookbook. It has some issues that are both deprecations and style issues. And a lot of what cook style it does is style things. Surprise, surprise, it's in the name. Prior to about this time, well, not even, prior to like July of 2019, it was 100% style. And it was 100% just Ruby style. So we have 100, I think like 190 chef specific style things now. A lot of those are also chef deprecations. This is definitely some trivial style, right? It's like throw your double colons, make it look like this. Those are the ones I love. Lamont hates them. But there's other stuff in here that is a little more important that might actually stop this cookbook from executing on a new version of Chef. So this is like a really old way of doing notifications, subscribes, or notifies, or whatever, where you would like kind of pass it to a method, and it was a little funky. Updating that by hand is a super pain, right? If you had a code base that had a ton of these, Food Critic would actually check this for you historically, and it would alert, but it wouldn't autocorrect it for you. So we can autocorrect these things now, which is why cook style is fun, because I can just cook style -a this, and it's in a folder called the world for me, and that's because I have a folder of all the supermarket I checked out. It's called the world.
Because when you run it, you want to feel like you're fixing the world.
You're fixing the world. Yeah. So it's still in yellow because it has to catch up to that. But we found 23 offenses and we corrected 23 things. Not all of those are chef things. I can put this up here. Not all of them are chef things, but we had like a bad license string. That's not going to stop the cookbook from running, but you should probably use the right license string. We want to make sure, people are using their single quotes, because that was the style we decided at some point. We want to simplify some code. We can look at one of these. I wonder if I can undo it actually, because it's pretty dramatic when you watch it in this resource. Unfortunately, it's not a Git checkout, so I can't. But basically, this took like some incredibly complex, unnecessary code and got rid of it. And that's really, again, like that big theme of Chef in the last few years is right here, right? Like,
yeah.
Things you don't need to do, things you don't need to understand. If you have 2 different platforms you support, you do not need to do that in an array with a block where you define the 2 platforms. Just write it twice. And there's a lot of stuff historically in Chef where people were, I think, trying to be a little more programmery than they needed to be. Just treat it like a script, right?
Yeah.
So we've gotten rid of a lot of that. Some of the stuff that Lamont has talked about and the things we've introduced over the years, we can go through now and we can autocorrect them. That issue where he was talking about the canonical resource names and all the fun stuff that goes along with that, we'll detect those. We'll find resources for certain conditions. I'm not going to get all of them, but we can detect when you don't have a name defined or a provides defined, and we'll at least alert you that, like, hey, this isn't going to work for Chef 16. So it's a really cool tool. I think I could throw it through another one and you can kind of see, like,
Yeah.
it's quite fast, and it is very good at picking apart super old cookbooks that have issues. This is a lot of just like style stuff again, but there was actually one of these had something that would legitimately make it fail. Yeah, here it is. All right. So like this shell out is not necessary. We do that for you for free. So both these lines just like come for free, which is great. We've just simplified things. But this last one, like, it doesn't just come for free now, but like if you try to do this, that entire mix-in doesn't exist. So this will actually cause this cookbook to fail. The fact that this is copyright 2011 ops code should probably give away that there's going to be issues with this cookbook. But
Yeah.
if you had a hand troubleshoot that and try to figure out like what was going on, why this mix-in's not working, it's not a good experience at all.
Yeah.
So this way, it'll just work.
This seems really valuable. First of all, for like longtime chef users who are managing a crap ton of cookbooks that maybe they started working on in Chef 11 or like older versions even, and they want to upgrade, that's awesome. But then
it's gone.
Yeah, before I even finish talking, like it's especially valuable in my opinion for like newer chef users who don't necessarily know like all of these deprecations, like what they mean and like why they've been deprecated from one version to the next or what have you. First of all, you get insight into all those deprecations immediately. You don't have to look through a bunch of documentation on why your code isn't working and like figure out what happened. But you also don't have to figure out how to fix it in the end because Cookstyle goes through and does it for you. And like that is the biggest like benefit to me because I can definitely write a cookbook. I can't necessarily go through and like tell you look at like the release notes from Chef 14 and Chef 15 and say like what stuff I'm using in the cookbooks that is being deprecated. So yeah, that's awesome.
It's been fun too, like finding, I feel like I probably should have brought up a better example, but like finding some of these super, super old, very complex, craftily written HWRPs that were written by people who had a very deep understanding of the internals of Chef. There's been times where I'm like, Lamont, is this doing what I think it's doing? Like, and we're sitting around like trying to decode like what resources are doing. And if that has to happen, if Chef employees are doing that, then like a person who just inherited that code base is never gonna figure out what those resources do.
Yeah.
So like one of the big things that I've been trying to add to it is like de-HWRPing HWRPs. So taking away all these weird things where people were writing sometimes just for the sake of doing it, like writing pure Ruby when they didn't need to, and turning it more into just like using what we've provided you, using the DSL, using things like resource name and provides, and using properties, like, because you can do that all yourself. You can write properties that aren't really properties, and you can initialize your own resource name if you want. Like, if you
But
know how Chef works deep down inside, you can do some very terrible things.
how
The
will
problem is
I
the next person that inherits your code base is never going to understand it. So
exactly?
we're like automatically undoing some of that. And I think that that's going to be really great for the people who inherit some of these code bases, who are like instantly are like, oh my God, Chef is terrible. And it was like, no, you had a really, really crafty employee at one point, and let's just like undo that all. Let's just make
Yeah.
it simple, and like we have all this built-in sugar, whatever you want to call it. Like it's there for a reason, right? It makes it so
Yeah,
much easier.
exactly. Rob says DHWRPing, putting resource providers on a weight loss program.
Yes. They get like legitimately a lot smaller. You can take some resources that were like these 500 line crazy monsters with like initialized methods and like all this stuff, and you're like, whoop, oh look, it's 15 lines, cool.
But wait,
That actually wasn't that bad.
how will I prove how smart I am if you don't have to read through 500
Yeah, I think we
lines?
might have had some people that were getting paid based on line count or something, maybe. I don't know.
Oh no.
But there's some good stuff that does that. There's also like some very silly cops. I should have turned it on for this one, but I have a cop that actually goes through and replaces all the ops code copyrights.
Ah, that's
Turns them
hilarious.
into Chef copyrights. That was like one of the, I think that was the very first cop that actually shipped, where I was like, let me go learn how RoboCop works. It'll also update the copyright date ranges, which makes Lamont really happy.
That's awesome. So a cop is basically like an enforcer, right? That
Yeah.
runs as part of Cook Style. There's
And
like
they
a
all
bunch
come
of
in
cops.
departments because they love this stuff as much as we do at Chef. So I can pull up like the actual Cook Style repository. If you haven't checked this repository out, it's pretty handy. You don't need to look at the actual code in it. 188 is the number of cops we have. This auto updates. But in this repository, hopefully not in this repository for long, but the docs all get generated on each merge. So every time a new cop gets added, they go into this docs directory, and you can hit the cops.markdown, and this is all the cops. They're by department. So I tried to break things into places where people could enable or disable departments. You can just run one of these departments at a time.
Oh, nice.
So chef correctness is like things that are probably going to break something. Something's going to behave maybe differently, or just straight up won't run. Deprecations. This is a pretty big one. Obviously, there's a lot of deprecations over the years. Some effortless stuff is things that'll get you ready for effortless, getting you off Berkshelf, off data bags, off environments. Those are not on by default. There is a lot of things that are off by default. That's kind of one of the nice features in Cook Style.
How do I enable a department? That, first of all,
Yeah, I can show you how you enable a department.
that's awesome. The Chef Effortless one. I love that.
Modernization is another big one. This is just like, hey, we have a much better way of doing what you're doing. Your cookbook from 2012 probably is using a bunch of terrible things, and a lot of these can just autocorrect again. Not all of them do. Like if we see that you're using definitions, can't really help you with that. Like you just have to rewrite them. And of course it doesn't load as soon as that. So it'll tell you like, is it enabled by default? Unfortunately, this doesn't render as nice as it could. And it doesn't support autocorrection. So that's, this particular one in the Modernize. I don't know why it didn't take me to the right one. But a lot of them are like, people were gem installing nokogiri back in the day in Chef. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need to do that. So if we see you gem installing nokogiri, I'm just going to delete the whole thing, right? And a lot of it is just like the code will continue to function, and you'll see like all these resources going by in Chef, and they're kind of just like doing nothing. So we can take that whole mental load you have in your code base and just like squash it down a little bit. Hopefully you don't get paid based on line count, because it's gonna just destroy that all.
Yeah.
But yeah,
As
let me show
well as
off
your soul,
enabling one. There's a
probably.
few other departments, like things for sharing. Redundant code is just like straight up things you don't need. And then there's things that are considered like heavily style. So that's like symbols versus strings and your attributes, of a long-standing Chef battle if you went back to like 2011. There's this really silly one, which was like a joke at a company rally. So we'll alert for you if you want. Again, this is off by default. This was me and Rob and some other people.
Yeah. Will says you should get paid on lines removed instead of
totally
lines added.
I have removed far more things over the years at Chef than I have added.
I think that aligns with our goals this year of resolving technical debt.
Yeah. So here's that cookbook we had before, and hopefully this will work. But you get the ability with cook style. You can do things like, so A is autocorrect. You can say only. So like I could say like chef style, and that would be like only the chef style cops. But nice. I'm fairly positive this will work. We'll just double check. I'm gonna have it run the comment format cop, and hopefully this still works. I haven't tried this. Oh, that one didn't work. Oh, you know why? Because that is not the correct one. Copyright comment format was the one I wanted. There's also a comment spacing cop. That's for Lamont. It takes out double spaces in your comments after the period.
Oh, my team is gonna love that.
I do a lot of trolling in cook style. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, so this is like, this cop was off by default, right? And we just enabled it just by saying only. You can also enable it in the rubicop.yaml. You can say chef/copyright comment format : and then the next one is enabled true. And that'll just turn that on for all your code. But that went through there and like updated that date, and still opscode.com. We gotta fix that. That's a bug. But yeah, it replaced the ops code and made it chef. So that was nice. That was my first silly cop. The date part should probably get removed, but it's highly tunable, which is pretty cool. The other thing to note is a lot of those cops, they would only apply to certain versions of Chef. And if you're on like a really old version of Chef, if you're on Chef 12 and you applied cook style out of the box, it might make your cookbook not run on Chef 12. So we do have the ability to target specific versions of Chef. You can put in the version of Chef that you're on in the rubicop.yaml, and you can say like, hey, I'm trying to target, Chef 12 or Chef 13 or whatever. And that way it won't go too far in that modernization, because that modernization, it will modernize. It assumes that you're on modern things. So if you're not on modern things, there might be some problems. But you can turn that off and you can step that. So if you were like, I want all my cookbooks to be on Chef 12 right now, you can put a single rubicop.yaml in your entire repo's base directory. It'll actually walk up and look for the files, and it does some crazy config combining and stuff. It's kind of cool. So you could be like, yeah, I'm on Chef 12.5. Like, don't do fancy modern things for me. You would modernize up to 12.5, upgrade your fleet to whatever, 13. Then you can modernize to 13. Whatever the last one was, and not explode the world, which is always
good. That's awesome. So there's like built-in sanity checks, even, so, or the ability to have those built-in sanity checks to say, like, I probably
this is not a cookbook to show that off on, but there's definitely some cops in there that'll like, hey, I see you're including this cookbook where this resource shipped in, and like, we put that into Chef. You don't need that cookbook anymore. But if you're on like Chef 12, you still do.
Yeah.
So it'll take out like the build essential cookbook or something, and then that will definitely break Chef 12 or 13 users.
Nice. I think, okay, did we cover all?
That's all I had, yeah.
Okay, then I have one more thing I do want to talk a little bit with you both about, because you both touched on this a little bit, I think, was YAML support. And we kind of like breezed right through it, which is kind of the purpose of the YAML support anyway, is to allow you to breeze right through it. But I do want to kind of come back to that and talk a little bit more about that. Basically what this means when I say we now have YAML support for recipes is the chef language, if you are unaware, is built on top of the Ruby language, which is very powerful, complex language. I don't even begin to understand it really, but we've put a lot of work over the last 10 years into like building this language for chef that allows you to use that powerful, complex language of Ruby, but without having to learn it. And this YAML support represents like the next step in that evolution, so that now, instead of even learning about Ruby files and like what resources look like in a Ruby file, in a chef recipe and all that, you can actually use YAML recipes, which Tim at the very least showed us an example of, and I think Lamont did too. But I can bring up a brand new tutorial that is fresh off the presses at learn.chef.io. I will share that in the link in the chat really quick. Once I thought I had it, but get started with Chef Infra. Okay, this is a brand new hot off the presses module. Yay, tutorials. And this module walks you through getting started, as the name implies, getting started with Chef Infra. And previously, we've kind of given people an exercise of walking through and configuring a file on a server, and then maybe configuring a web server using Ruby. We've gone through and done the exact same thing here, but here we are kind of building on the YAML knowledge that you kind of work with Test Kitchen. We build on that sort of framework and build a recipe using YAML. So also, I just realized that I'm not sharing my screen in the Zoom. So like I'm scrolling through the module and showing you all things that you can't see at all. But I highly recommend going through that module, and you can see, you can look at sort of compare how a Ruby recipe looks versus a YAML recipe. And I think YAML is just a little more straightforward, where it allows you to declare key value pairs instead of those Ruby blocks. So you don't have to know that there's a do and an end in order for resources to get executed in Chef. You can just say, hey, I want this resource executed, and the YAML recipe will handle that for you. So I recommend going through that module. And the nice thing about the YAML support is that it's not like a separate learning path from using Ruby with the Chef language. It's just kind of a sort of an introductory step on that same pathway. And so if you're already using Ruby, you probably don't necessarily need this YAML support, but it still would be valuable if you're writing more compact and simple recipes to deploy smaller amounts of resources. Then as you're starting to get more complex with what you're doing, you can move into Ruby recipes and utilize that wonderful Ruby programming language. So yes, all that said, I want to make sure we did have, like, people were asking questions in the chat all throughout, but I want to open the floor for anyone in the channel to ask questions of Tim and Lamont. And then I'll kind of wrap us up with The module should be right. This link here at learn.chef.io. There you go. Yeah, so if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. And I am going to wrap us up by talking about the sessions that you can attend next week to be a part of the ChefConf online live audience. So we're, as you may be aware, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. And social distancing is being enforced. And so instead of having an in-person conference in Seattle where we bring 1,000 users together into a small space with recycled air, we've decided to host ChefConf Online this year. And what that means is you get to participate in a number of different ways. One of those ways is by attending the session recordings. So we're pre-recording our sessions to be aired on June 2nd, and you can be a part of the live studio audience from the comfort of your pajamas and Zoom at home. So head to chefconf.io/session-recordings to look at the different sessions that you can attend and to register to be part of those live, that live studio audience. So that being said, let's see, I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions for the guys. No. Okay, awesome. So on next week, we are proud to host a few different sessions. So on May 12th at 8 a.m. Pacific time, we are hosting a test-driven infrastructure session hosted by, presented by Arthur Maltzen from Capital One. On May 13th at 12 p.m. Pacific time, Kyle Harper, from Cerner is going to be joining us and leading a discussion on compliance called Show Me the Compliance. I like there's kind of a movie theme in the titles this year. There's a few references to different movies in here. So Show Me the Money, Show Me the Compliance. On May 14th, we have Lance Albertson from OSU Open Source Lab. He'll be giving a talk called Multi-Node Testing with Test Kitchen, Terraform, and Chef Inspec. So if you have been following along the stream over the course of, I guess it was March, it feels so long ago, even though it's only been a month. I was working with Terraform and trying to spin up a multi-node test environment, actually, with Terraform and Chef Automate. So this kind of builds on that and adds in the Chef Inspec element and testing instead of just spinning up the environment like I was doing. So check that out on May 14th. Also on May 14th at 2 p.m., we have Annie Hedgepeth, who's been a longtime contributor to the InSpec portion of our community. She will be giving a discussion or a presentation called Moving Security and Sanity Left by testing Terraform with Chef Inspec. So if you haven't noticed, the theme of next week is security and compliance with Inspec, Chef Inspec. So tune in next week. Head over to chefconf.io/session-recordings and sign up to attend. You can ask your questions in these Zoom recordings. So if anything comes up, you get to ask the presenter live questions, which is pretty awesome. And then on June 2nd, you can join in to watch the recording and to have a discussion with the broader chef audience or community and sort of expand the discussion there. So then on Friday here at the Chef live stream, we are going to have I believe we are inviting Clinton Wolf, who was on the Chef Inspec team and has contributed a huge amount to Chef Inspec and to our compliance offerings. And so he is going to come on and discuss some of the features that have been released over the last year and some of the stuff you can look forward to in the next year, just like Tim and Lamont were kind enough to do today. So let's see. I kind of bulldozed right through that and didn't check for any questions in the chat. It doesn't look like there are any. Hey, Ramarith says, woo. So yeah, check out all those awesome session recordings and join us next week back here at 11 a.m. Pacific time on Friday. And I just want to say a really huge thank you, Tim and Lamont. First of all, for joining this this stream today and just sharing all the awesome work you've done, but more importantly, like for contributing all of the not just the actual like code and work that you've done, but for taking on the weight of kind of being a face to the community and like a representation of how we handle things at Chef. It's like I don't want to get like too cheesy, but it's kind of an honor to have you on here and talk with you guys and work with you. So thank you very much for everything that you've contributed. Thank you for yeah, for continuing to like, it's so obvious how much you care about the work that you've done, not just in you sharing it with us today, but in the community Slack, in the all the things that you do. So thank you very much. And yes, Gising MSYS, I don't know. Yeah, says awesome work, Tim and Lamont. Yeah, I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. So thank you again for joining us and for being you and doing all the awesome things that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was fun.
Yeah, no problem.
Talk about stuff.
Cool. Well, I think that is all for today. And I think if there aren't any more questions in the chat, we might check and see if one of our other coworkers, Echo Hack, is streaming today. He has his own channel where he streams Diablo 3. And right now he's trying to reach Paragon level 3000, which I don't know if anybody has played Diablo 3 at all, but I played for a few weeks and I only got to like Paragon level 17 or 20 or something. So like he's pretty up there. Yeah, Alan says holy smokes. Yes, he is he's grinding right now. So so I think we're gonna raid Echo Hack's channel if he is streaming. What's that? Oh, awesome. Okay, Garth is ready to go. So yeah, stick around to support our coworker Echo Hack in his streaming dreams. And we will see you next Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Bye, y'all.
See ya, everybody.